Illinois is often described as back on its feet. People point to Chicago's skyline, its global economy, its cultural influence, and they assume the story has a clean ending. Crisis managed, problems solved, state recovered. But Illinois did not recover the way America thinks it did. It adjusted, it rebalanced, it absorbed losses quietly, while the national narrative moved on to other stories, other crises, other states that demanded attention more dramatically. Recovery implies restoration. It implies returning to something that was lost. But you cannot return to economic foundations that no longer exist. You cannot restore industries that moved overseas. You cannot rebuild communities that lost their reason for existing. Illinois learned to function differently. That is not the same as recovering. Today, we are breaking down 25 hard truths about why Illinois never truly recovered, and why the gap between perception and reality keeps growing wider every year. Let's begin. Number 25. Recovery was measured from the top down. Illinois' recovery is usually judged by Chicago's performance. When Chicago stabilizes, headlines announce Illinois is back. When Chicago's economy grows, analysts declare the state has turned a corner. But a state does not recover when only one metropolitan area stabilizes. It recovers when the rest stops bleeding, when small towns regain economic purpose, when downstate communities find new foundations to replace what vanished. That never fully happened in Illinois. Chicago contains roughly 75% of the state's economic activity. When recovery is measured by Chicago's metrics, the rest of Illinois disappears from the calculation. The methodology itself guarantees the conclusion. Illinois is considered fine because Chicago is fine. But Chicago is not Illinois. It is the part that made it into the spreadsheet. Number 24. Chicago's strength hid statewide weakness. Chicago didn't fail. It adapted. The city reinvented itself as a global services hub, a tech corridor, a financial center. It attracted international investment, educated workers, and cultural relevance that kept it competitive with coastal cities. But Chicago's resilience masked deeper issues across downstate Illinois, where manufacturing jobs disappeared faster than replacements arrived. While Chicago pivoted to knowledge economy jobs, communities built around factories, warehouses, and industrial production watched their economic bases erode. Chicago's success became a screen. National observers looked at the skyline and assumed the state reflected it. Media coverage focused on the city because the city generated stories worth telling. Meanwhile, the rest of Illinois experienced a different trajectory, one that rarely made headlines, because decline isn't as photogenic as skyscrapers. 23. Industrial losses were permanent, not temporary. Illinois did not lose factories during a recession and wait for them to come back when conditions improved. The factories were not temporarily closed. They were permanently relocated, automated, or eliminated entirely. Entire economic ecosystems vanished. Not just jobs, but the supply chains that fed those jobs, the small businesses that served those workers, the tax bases that funded those communities. When a factory closes, the ripple effects extend far beyond the building itself. What replaced manufacturing was not equivalent. Service jobs, gig work, and retail positions filled some gaps, but rarely matched the wages or stability that industrial employment once provided. Illinois did not experience a downturn. It experienced structural transformation, permanent change disguised as temporary hardship. Population decline was treated as a public relations problem. For years, Illinois lost population. People moved to Sunbelt states, to suburbs outside state lines, to places where housing was cheaper and taxes were lower. But political and business leadership often treated this as a messaging problem. The solution seemed to be better. Marketing, improved reputation, and more aggressive promotion of the state's advantages. That framing delayed real solutions. Population loss was not happening because Illinois had bad public relations. It was happening because economic fundamentals pushed people to leave, including jobs, housing costs, tax burdens, and quality of life calculations that favored relocation. You cannot market your way out of structural problems. You can only solve them or watch people continue voting with their feet while press releases insist everything is fine. Number 21. Pensions became a slow-motion crisis. Illinois' pension obligations did not explode in a single dramatic moment. They accumulated quietly over decades. Promises were made by previous administrations, payments were deferred, and obligations grew while funding lagged behind. Now, those accumulated promises consume the flexibility the state no longer has. Budget negotiations revolve around pension payments, and infrastructure investments compete with retirement obligations. Every dollar committed to past promises is a dollar unavailable for future needs. The pension crisis did not cause Illinois' struggles. It did not start everything, but it locked in constraints that make addressing other problems extraordinarily difficult. The state carries weight from decisions made before current problems even emerged. Past obligations limit present options. That is not a headline, but it shapes everything that follows it. 20. Downstate Illinois was economically decoupled. As Chicago globalized, connecting to international markets, attracting foreign investment, and competing with world cities, much of downstate Illinois became more regional, more isolated, and more dependent on whatever remained after industrial departures. Two economies developed within one state. They operated under different logics, faced different challenges, and required different solutions. But they shared a state government that struggled to serve both regions simultaneously. Chicago's needs were not downstate's needs. Policies that helped one region often felt irrelevant or harmful to the other. The economic coupling that once connected the state's regions weakened until they barely resembled parts of the same system. Illinois did not divide politically because of culture wars. It divided economically first, and politics followed. Number 19. Political gridlock replaced long-term planning. Illinois politics became defined by conflict between parties, between regions, and between interest groups with incompatible demands. Budgets became battlegrounds. Basic governance became contested. In that environment, short-term survival became the priority. Just keeping government functioning consumed available energy. Long-term rebuilding, the kind that requires sustained investment, bipartisan cooperation, and patience measured in decades, never had the oxygen to happen. Political gridlock is not just frustrating, it is expensive. It prevents the coordinated responses that structural challenges require. It substitutes crisis management for strategic planning. Illinois did not lack ideas for recovery, it lacked the political capacity to implement them. The gridlock became its own problem, compounding every other challenge the state faced. 18. Recovery looked like stabilization, not growth. Illinois didn't rebound, it stopped falling. The bleeding slowed, the losses became manageable. The decline reached a floor rather than continuing indefinitely. Those aren't the same thing as recovery. Stabilization means survival. Recovery means restoration. Growth means expansion beyond previous peaks. Illinois achieved the first, partially achieved the second, and rarely achieved the third outside Chicago's most successful sectors. But stabilization gets reported as recovery because the distinction is subtle. Headlines celebrate when things stop getting worse. They rarely note that things also stopped getting better. Illinois learned to function at a lower equilibrium. That's adaptation. That's survival. But calling it recovery inflates what actually happened. 17. Manufacturing never found a new identity. Illinois once made things: steel, machinery, equipment, processed foods, The state's identity included industrial production as a core element. That identity provided not just jobs, but purpose, pride, and community structure. When manufacturing declined, no equally strong replacement industry filled the gap outside major metros. Logistics grew, but logistics jobs do not replace manufacturing wages. Healthcare expanded, but healthcare serves existing populations rather than attracting new growth. The economic identity that once organized downstate communities dissolved. Nothing coherent replaced it. Towns that knew what they were, manufacturing towns, became towns that were not sure what they were anymore. Identity loss is harder to measure than job loss, but it is just as real and just as damaging. 16. Infrastructure aged faster than investment. Illinois still runs on infrastructure systems built for a different era: roads, bridges, water systems, and public facilities designed for mid-20th century populations and mid-20th century economic patterns. Those systems require constant maintenance. They eventually require replacement, but maintenance budgets competed with pension obligations, political conflicts, and immediate crises that demanded attention. Maintenance replaced expansion. Keeping existing systems functional consumed resources that might have built new capacity. The infrastructure that enabled past growth could not enable future growth because it was fully occupied, preventing collapse. Illinois did not choose decline. It chose between competing priorities, and infrastructure lost often enough that cumulative neglect became its own barrier to recovery. 15. Chicago carried the narrative alone. When national media covers Illinois, they cover Chicago. When analysts assess Illinois' economy, they assess Chicago's performance. When tourists visit Illinois, they visit Chicago. Chicago's global relevance allowed America to believe Illinois was fine. One city performed well enough to stand in for an entire state in public perception. But one engine cannot pull an entire state forever. Chicago's success concentrated resources, talent, and attention in ways that arguably accelerated decline elsewhere. Growth that might have spread instead pooled. Chicago deserves its success, but that success should not be confused with statewide recovery. The city and the state are not synonyms, even when public discourse treats them as such. If you are finding value in these deeper state breakdowns that go beyond headlines, subscribe to Hard Truth Untold. This channel exists to challenge the stories we repeat because they are convenient, not because they are accurate. Most channels accept the simple version. We dig into what actually happened. Hit subscribe, and let's continue. 14. Illinois became a transit state again. Like Missouri before it, Illinois returned to being a pass-through, a state that goods and people move across rather than settle in. Illinois' central location makes it ideal for logistics. Highways, railroads, and airports converge here. Distribution centers warehouse products destined for elsewhere. Trucks and trains cross the state constantly, but transit economies do not anchor populations the way production economies do. You do not need to live somewhere just because your packages pass through it. People move through Illinois. Goods move through Illinois. But fewer people put down roots, build families, and stake futures on staying. The state became infrastructure, useful, essential, but not a destination. Illinois' tax debates dominated headlines for years. Too high, too regressive, too complicated. Debates about tax structure consumed political energy that might have addressed underlying challenges. But taxes were not the original wound. They were a response to earlier losses. Revenue declined because economic activity declined. Rates rose because bases shrank. The symptoms became the controversy, while causes received less attention. Tax debates are important, but they are also distractions when they substitute for conversations about why the economy weakened in the first place. Illinois argued about taxes while manufacturing left, population shrank, and communities hollowed out. The argument was real. It just was not about the right thing. 12. Urban recovery did not reach rural Illinois. Economic growth does not automatically spread from successful cities to surrounding regions. The assumption that urban prosperity would trickle out to rural Illinois proved incorrect. Urban growth pooled instead of spreading. Successful companies concentrated in Chicago because that is where talent, infrastructure, and services existed. Workers moved toward opportunity, rather than opportunity moving toward workers. Rural Illinois experienced this as abandonment. The growth happening elsewhere did not arrive. The promises that recovery would reach everyone remained unfulfilled. Urban and rural Illinois now operate under different economic logics. What helps one does not automatically help the other. That disconnect is not temporary, it is structural. 11. Education couldn't offset job loss fast enough. Higher education expanded in Illinois. Community colleges trained workers. Universities produced graduates. The theory was that education would prepare the workforce for new economy jobs. But education couldn't offset job loss at scale. Displaced factory workers in their 50s couldn't realistically return to school for 4-year degrees. Skills that took decades to develop in manufacturing were not transferable to knowledge economy positions. Education helps individuals. It rarely rescues entire regions experiencing rapid economic transformation. The timeline does not match. Jobs disappear in years, while workforce transformation takes generations. Illinois invested in education. Education alone couldn't solve the problem. 10. Illinois was too big to collapse and too complex to fix. Federal attention focuses on crisis or success. States that dramatically fail attract intervention, and states that dramatically succeed attract investment. Illinois existed in the uncomfortable middle, troubled enough to struggle, functional enough to continue, and complex enough to resist simple solutions. That middle position meant less attention, less urgency, and less support than states facing obvious catastrophe. Illinois did not qualify for emergency measures because it was not emergency enough. But being too big to collapse is not the same as being healthy. Illinois continued because it had to, because the alternative was unthinkable for a major state with a global city. Continuation is not recovery, it is just not failure. Section 9. Migration changed who Illinois works for. Illinois did not empty out entirely. Population declined, but people remained. What changed was composition: who stayed, who left, and who arrived. Younger, educated, mobile workers had options. Many exercised those choices, relocating to states with lower costs or faster growth. Older workers, those with family ties and those without relocation resources, they stayed. The state did not just shrink, it reshuffled. Different demographics remained with different skills, different expectations, and different pressures on public services. Illinois now serves a different population than it served a generation ago. Policies designed for the previous population do not automatically fit the current one. Section 8. Illinois adapted quietly, not successfully. Adaptation is not the same as success. Adaptation means adjusting to changed circumstances. Success means thriving under them. Illinois adapted. Budgets adjusted downward. Expectations lowered. Services reduced. Communities learned to function with less. Families made do. But adaptation kept systems alive without restoring momentum. It prevented collapse without enabling growth. It maintained function without building toward something better. Quiet adaptation does not generate headlines. It does not look like crisis or triumph. It looks like ordinary life continuing despite constraints. Illinois adapted. Whether adaptation counts as success depends entirely on what you are measuring. 7. Chicago's success created unreal comparisons. Every part of Illinois got measured against Chicago, and every part came up short. Chicago's economy grew. Why could not Peoria? Chicago attracted investment. Why could not Rockford? Chicago retained young professionals. Why could not Springfield? These comparisons ignored the fundamental differences between a global city and regional communities. Chicago had advantages that could not be replicated elsewhere in the state. Expecting other cities to match Chicago's performance guaranteed they would always seem like failures. The comparison itself was unfair, but it shaped how Illinois understood itself as a state where one city succeeded and everything else disappointed. 6. The Midwest label flattened the problem. Labeling Illinois as Midwest blurred important distinctions. The Midwest label suggests uniformity, as if all the states between the coasts faced the same conditions. But Illinois' challenges were not identical to Ohio's, Wisconsin's, or Iowa's. Industrial decline hit different industries in different places. Agricultural stress affected different crops in different regions. Urban dynamics varied, city by city. Treating Illinois as generically Midwestern prevented understanding what made its situation specific. The label flattened the problem into something familiar and manageable. The actual problem was particular and complex. Labels make thinking easier. They also make thinking lazier. 5. Illinois lost influence without losing visibility. Chicago stayed visible. Its skyline appeared in movies. Its sports teams attracted national attention. Its cultural institutions remained prestigious. But visibility is not the same as influence. While Chicago remained visible, Illinois lost leverage in national politics, economic decisions, and policy debates. Population decline reduced congressional representation. Economic struggles reduced investment appeal. Political gridlock reduced credibility as a model for anything. Illinois stayed famous. It did not stay powerful. Those trends diverged, and that divergence matters for what the state can accomplish going forward. 4. Recovery was defined by balance sheets, not people. When analysts declared Illinois recovered, they cited budgets, bond ratings, and fiscal metrics. The balance sheet improved, and the numbers looked better. But balance sheet recovery and human recovery are not identical. Budgets can stabilize while communities continue struggling. Fiscal health can improve while families remain stressed. People do not experience recovery through spreadsheets. They experience it through job security, housing stability, healthcare access, and confidence in the future. Illinois' numbers improved. Whether Illinois' people recovered is a different question, one that aggregate data does not answer. 3. Illinois became functional before it became healthy. Systems worked. Government operated. Services continued. Illinois functioned in the mechanical sense of the word. But communities struggled. Families faced ongoing economic pressure. Futures remained uncertain. The state operated without thriving. Functional isn't the same as healthy. A patient can be functional while still sick. A marriage can be functional while still troubled. A state can be functional while still wounded. Illinois achieved function. Health remains a work in progress, one that headlines have largely stopped tracking. 2. America needed Illinois to be fine. A major state failing openly would force uncomfortable questions about deindustrialization, about regional inequality, and about what happens when economic foundations shift and communities cannot adapt fast enough. Those questions are uncomfortable. It was easier to decide the problem was solved. So the national narrative became that Illinois struggled, Illinois recovered, story over. The reality is more complicated, but complicated does not fit news cycles or political messaging. America needed Illinois to be fine because the alternative, acknowledging ongoing structural challenges in a major state, was more troubling than convenient fiction. Illinois didn't recover. It learned to carry the weight. Illinois still functions. It still contributes to the national economy. It still matters in ways that do not make headlines. But recovery implies restoration, returning to what was lost. That is not what happened. Illinois adapted to loss. It learned to function with a smaller industrial base, a smaller population, and tighter constraints. It absorbed damage, and it kept moving. That is not failure. People who keep going after setbacks are not failures. States that continue functioning despite structural challenges are not failures. But it's not the comeback story America likes to tell. It is not triumphant. It is not inspirational. It is persistence. Illinois learned to carry a weight that was not supposed to be permanent. The weight remains. So does Illinois. If you're from Illinois, does this match what you've seen? Does it capture something the official recovery narrative left out? And if you're not from Illinois, did this change how you think about the state? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and they help shape what comes next. There is another video playing that digs into a state most people think they understand, but do not. Subscribe to Hard Truth Untold, because the truth does not always look like recovery. Sometimes it looks like survival, and survival deserves recognition too.